All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started here. So my name is TJ VanToll. I'm developer advocate at Telerik, and I'll be talking about NativeScript today. Now, my first question is, how many people took part in the NativeScript workshop yesterday? You have any people? So 1 or 2 people. So for those of you that did, you're going to see about a 10, 15-minute refresher. It's important that you still laugh at the jokes that I make, just to keep things lively here. But most importantly, after that sort of refresher, it's good to see a little demo. I'm going to build out a little app at the end of this talk. So what is NativeScript? It's really a runtime for building native apps. We kind of saw this during the keynote already. And there's a lot of technologies that do this sort of thing. I think it seems like there's a new framework every day that allows you to build mobile apps. And so I think the easiest way to explain what NativeScript is to kind of talk about what it isn't in terms of technologies you may already be familiar with. So how many people here know of PhoneGap? Most people, I'd say probably this is about 80% of the room. So the biggest difference between NativeScript and PhoneGap, and you saw this during the keynote, is that NativeScript, you're using truly native UI components. You're not building DOM elements, you're building with native UI controls. Now, if you know of Xamarin or Titanium, the biggest difference between NativeScript and those tools is that they both have pretty clever cross-compilation solutions. And what that means is that they take your code, you write in C# when you write Xamarin code, you write in JavaScript when you write in Titanium, and they cross-compile your code. So they basically take it from the language you wrote it in and turn it into Objective-C or Java code. NativeScript doesn't do this. The JavaScript you run in NativeScript, and you saw some of this during the keynote where I typed it out, that actually runs directly on your device at runtime. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that works momentarily. The last I have on my list is React Native. Now, from a high level, React Native, if you're familiar with it, it's probably the most similar in architecture to how NativeScript works. But the biggest difference, the biggest differentiator for NativeScript is that it provides this direct access to native APIs in JavaScript. Now, I actually like to think of this at a high level as just a bridge. NativeScript sits in between the JavaScript you write your code in and these native platforms. But I actually think it's important to give a specific example so that you can know what I'm talking about. So this is an example from the NativeScript Android runtime. And I'll give your brain a minute or two to look this over, because as you kind of can see, this is a weird mishmash of Java and JavaScript code. This is completely valid JavaScript syntax. But at the same time, it's accessing Java APIs. This is actually truly instantiating a Java time object, calling its set method, and calling its format method. And NativeScript is cross-platform, so you can actually run this on iOS as well. How many people are Matrix fans in here? Oh, wow, that's actually pretty good. I don't always get that sort of response. But it works on iOS as well, so you can access iOS APIs. I have a quick example here where I make an UI alert view. And if you go to the iOS API docs, you can actually make a mapping. You can see these APIs and make a direct map to those docs. And you could do the same thing for Android as well. Now, I want to spend some time talking about how all of this works, because it is a little bit of magic, but it's really the underpinning of NativeScript. And as you'll see throughout this talk, everything kind of builds upon this core concept of being able to build and being able to access these native platform APIs. So the first thing to know is that NativeScript uses JavaScript virtual machines to make the magic happen. Now, if you're not familiar with what a JavaScript virtual machine is, it's basically the piece of code that runs JavaScript. So browsers ship this, IE, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, all ship a JavaScript VM. iOS uses JavaScript Core, Android uses V8, and those are the VMs that NativeScript uses as well. So to put that in context of our previous example, the code on the top there is going to run on V8, and the bottom is going to run on JavaScript Core. So I have a question for everyone in the audience here. I say that this code on the top runs on V8. Google Chrome also uses V8. So what would happen if I took those top 3 lines of code and tried to run them in Chrome? If I pasted it in, what would happen? Come on, someone. There is no Android object, right? Chrome doesn't know what Android is. So somehow, NativeScript has to tell Android what is Android, and tell iOS what is UI Alert View. And NativeScript actually has a fairly clever solution to this. And it's kind of a 2-part solution. The first is what's known as a metadata generation process. And basically what it is these separate repositories that build up a representation of iOS and Android. And they use like the computer science-y term as like reflection or introspection, or basically these APIs that both Objective-C and Java have to kind of help you learn about the platform itself. to build up this giant thing of data, this data set of these are the Android APIs, these are the iOS APIs. And as you might expect, it's not exactly performant to build this sort of thing. So as such, it's done before, it's not done at runtime during your app. It's something that gets injected into your app at build time. But just because you have these APIs, you still need some way to tell the JavaScript VM about it. And as it turns out, these JavaScript VMs, both V8 and JavaScript Core, have APIs to do this sort of thing. Now, if you think about this, this kind of makes sense. For instance, when you're in Chrome, you can use the window object. But the window object, that's not in JavaScript. If you look at the ECMAScript specification, there's no window. So V8 doesn't know what window is. So Chrome needs some way to tell V8, oh, this is window, this is how it works, these are the APIs it uses. Now, if you're familiar with Node.js, you might know that Node.js also uses V8, and it does similar things where it injects different behavior into the JavaScript VM. And NativeScript does the exact same thing, except NativeScript is taking this metadata from earlier and injecting those APIs into the JavaScript VM. So that is why Android is available on Android, and all these UI and NS APIs are available on iOS. Now, the final piece of the puzzle, and I promise you this is the last of our deep dive into the architecture here, is OK, so these APIs are there, so you can tell V8 that Android is a thing. But how do you actually then make that final bridge? And this is probably the most complex of the NativeScript stack. You really dive into some C++ code. The NativeScript runtimes are primarily written in C++. These JavaScript VMs are written in C++ as well. And on iOS, the situation is actually a little bit easier because C++ code on iOS can actually directly invoke Objective-C APIs. So there's a little bit of code in the NativeScript runtime that kind of sits as a middleman to watch what you do in JavaScript and propagate those over back and forth, bridge them, if you will, between iOS and JavaScript. And on Android, there's one additional step because Android, you're running in Java, and C++ code in Android has to go through what's known as the JNI. Basically, it's just another little step to let C++ code talk to Java code. Now, hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you feel a little bit more like Neo at the end of the matrix. But even if not, the important thing to understand is just that you can access these APIs. But I know that people have a lot of concerns when they hear this sort of thing, because you think like, well, wait, why in the world would I want to do that, right? I want to use JavaScript, I want to use a cross-platform solution, because I don't want to know that stuff. Like, I don't really care to know how UI Alert View works or how any of these modules work. And so that's where NativeScript modules comes in. And I think this is another thing that's easier to explain with a specific code example. So here's my example. You're building the next great mobile app, and you need to allocate a file. It's a pretty common thing to need to do. So because of what we talked about for the first part of this session, what you could do is you could write the Android code that you see on the bottom of the screen next to the Android little dude there. You could write new java.io.file. The NativeScript Android runtime knows what that is. It knows how to handle it. It'll allocate an Android file for you. You could then, for your iOS app, write that abomination that you see on the bottom of the screen. That the NativeScript iOS runtime knows what that is. It knows how to deal with it. It'll handle that appropriately. But what you'd probably rather do is write the code on the top 2 lines of the screen. And what that's doing is it's using require, which is a NativeScript-provided method, to bring in a JavaScript module, in this case the file system module, and using that module to allocate a file. Now what's cool about this is not only is this syntax really easy to use and really familiar, if you've done any Node.js work before, you may recognize the require method. It's part of what's known as the common JS specification, which NativeScript also implements. But also that the file system module itself is written using those semantics you see on the bottom of the screen, which makes those modules really easy to debug. You're not dealing with bytecode. You can just dive in and see what native APIs are at use. You can extend them easily as well. So there's a bunch of these things. Just to give you an example, here's an HTTP one. You can see similarly easy to just require the module and call a simple method to get what you need to get done. Now, there are dozens of these modules within NativeScript, and I'll walk through those momentarily. But because these modules are so easy to write, we're actually starting to see community modules pop up for these sort of things as well. But the next question is, well, OK, you have all this utility modules. Like, I can make an HTTP call, and I can allocate a file, but that doesn't actually build me an app. So how do I go about building an app? And there's actually 2 different ways to use NativeScript, and you actually saw this during the keynote. You can use NativeScript as part of the Telerik platform and use some of the tooling that I showed earlier. The platform has been fully updated to support NativeScript, so when you need a backend for your app, when you need to do push notifications, when you need analytics, you can add that sort of thing. You can build your apps from Visual Studio, as I showed during the keynote as well. The Telerik platform is a paid product, but everybody gets a free 30-day trial, so you could give it a shot, see what you think. Or you can also use NativeScript as part of the NativeScript CLI, which is the completely free and, like everything NativeScript, open source way of building NativeScript apps. The NativeScript CLI has some system requirements, so I'm going to show a quick demo of the NativeScript CLI in a moment. But to get the CLI to work, you have to have certain things installed on your machine in order to build apps. So on Android, that means having a JDK, Apache Ant in order to do Android builds, and an Android SDK. For iOS, you're going to need to have a Mac. You're going to need to have Xcode, the Xcode's CLI tools as well, all of which I already have installed on my Mac here. Now, what's important is that regardless of these two different ways to use NativeScript, NativeScript itself is the same. These are basically two ways of interacting with the exact same framework under the hood. And with that in mind, I actually want to show you what it's like to build a NativeScript app. So we'll kick it over into the demos. If you can switch me over to my laptop. There we go. So I have, let's see what resolution I'm dealing with here. I have a little app up in here, a Hello World thing. Just to quickly show how I got to this point, all I have to do is install the NativeScript CLI from npm. It's just npm install. After that, I have to run the tns create command, give the project a name. In this case, I call this cute memes, and you'll see why in a minute. Those of you that attended the workshop might have an idea of where I'm going here. Then I need to run the platform add command for each platform I intend to support for my app. So for iOS, I could run this for Android as well. Now, I've already done this and scaffolded a little hello world that you're seeing here. What the platform add command that I just showed earlier does is it puts files into this platforms folder. And this platform folder actually contains, oops, wrong window here. Let's see if I can get this right. There we go. This platform folder actually contains the native project. So what NativeScript does is when you run your apps, which I'm going to do in a moment, it takes your code from this app directory where you're doing all of your development of your project, injects those files into the native project. So you see, here's my Android code. And if I look in iOS, I can find things like my Xcode project is hanging out here. And then, in that case, kicks it up. Now, what I have is I have an additional little thing that you saw me use during the keynote. And I have a little build step built into Sublime so that I can automatically launch my apps in the simulator. So just to give you an idea of what's going on, how I'm making this happen. So if I can remember where this is in Sublime Text. So Sublime Text has some fairly weird conventions. In this case, I have a little NativeScript build file. So I'll just show you what this does. Basically, that says in the project I'm working with, whenever I run Command B, which is what invokes this build script, all I'm doing is running this from the CLI. So I'm saying, run this thing on the emulator, and I'd like to run this in an iPhone 6. So that's all I'm doing, and that should have loaded behind the scenes here. Let's see if we have our app. There we go. So hello world, this is extremely exciting. I promise you that this will get better. But this is the basic starting point of a NativeScript app. You can see that I use UI component or XML here to define my UI components. And I know what some of you might be thinking, like XML, I feel very dirty just by looking at this code. And I kind of am with you in a certain extent. I've certainly seen my fair share of horrible XML data structures. But while XML is kind of ugly and unmanageable for data, it actually is a really nice way to define a UI. I mean, HTML is just another markup language. We have like JSX for React. There's a number of people using this sort of structure to build UIs, and it works out really well. These elements that you see here are actually NativeScript modules. So if I dig in here, I haven't shown the TNS modules directory, but this is where all those NativeScript modules that abstract away cross-platform things live. And you can see there's quite a few in here. For instance, there's the camera module that'll actually have the implementation for Android and iOS. If I want to see the UI components, they're all in this UI directory here. So what I could do is I could jump into the page here, and I could say, like, oh, I'm actually curious how this was built on iOS. So I could open it up and look through here, find the APIs, see how it works. I could extend this sort of file. This sort of thing makes a lot of things possible. I don't have to dive into bytecode to see how this app is being structured and how it works. It also means, I'll get into this a little bit later, that you can define your own XML elements to use in your UIs as well and build a JavaScript implementation that lives behind it. So this is Hello World. Hello World is not very exciting, so let's do something a little more cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ditch Hello World. I'm going to bring in something a little more complex, and stick with me for a minute, and I'll explain what's going on here. I'll kill that down there. Now I added just one UI element here. I added a list view. So I still have the page here. All I have within the page at this point is just a list view. Within the list view, I have a template that's just going to tell me how to lay out each of the items that appear within the list view. So I have a list, and basically I have a list of labels, labels that have text. And that's as much detail as we'll get into for the moment. Let's see, let's expand this back out. Now, NativeScript has this naming convention. Notice how my JavaScript files here and my XML file has the same name. That's how NativeScript associates these two files, so that you have your logic in one place, your UI definition in another place, and then you could also define, as we'll see in a moment here, a CSS file for the page as well to provide your styling for the page. Now, the next thing to note is how these things sort of map together. So I have this loaded attribute on the page here, and this actually corresponds to the loaded function that lives in my JavaScript file. Now, I mentioned earlier that NativeScript uses the CommonJS specification, and really at a high level, the CommonJS spec is just two things: a way of requiring modules and this export syntax to expose what you want, and be that properties or methods, to other modules. So when other modules use you, these are the things that you're making available. So in this case, by exporting this loaded function, I make it available for my XML to subscribe to. So basically, when this page loads, fire this function. The next thing that happens is with this binding context. So binding context, how many people here have done sort of are familiar with like the MVVM, that term? So a decent amount of people. So MVVM is known as model view view model, and it's something that NativeScript really embraces as a way to tie, or to use data binding to tie your UI and your JavaScript together. And that's what's being used here. What I'm doing is I'm saying the binding context, or a JavaScript object that I want to use as the basis of data binding, is this object here. And to again show the mapping back and forth, if you check out this Reddit property being used here, that's actually what's being mapped to this items attribute here. So double curly brace syntax, you may recognize this if you've done there's a lot of front-end templating solutions that uses this. I think XAML uses this syntax as well, so a lot of people are going to find this syntax fairly familiar. And basically all I'm saying is the items attribute of this should be bound to this array here. And actually, I think it's easiest if at this point we just see what this looks like. Now, all I'm doing here is eventually I'm going to get some data from Reddit here in the moment, but right now I'm just calling this load items, and actually bring this over so I can see in my simulator here, and I'm just pushing two static things into it. But what's important here is because I'm using this data binding approach, that's it. I just push things into this array. And because these things because this thing is implemented as a data model, I don't have to do anything like tell my UI to update. The update's just automatically in place. Now, there's a lot of front-end solutions that do this sort of thing, Angular being one example that does this sort of thing. But what's cool here is that, remember, this is a native app. This is a UI table view here. This is an iOS control, and you're bringing data binding to that platform as well. So this is a little bit better, but we're still managed to not get beyond hello world here, which is not all that exciting. So let's actually be a little bit adventurous and get some data from Reddit. This is always fun to try live. Let's see what comes back. At this point, I showed my HTTP module during my slides. This goes out and does a JSON call. And in this case, I'm getting JSON from, and let me kill this back down to 1, from Reddit's API. I'm using the cuteness thread because I'm not that adventurous to go out to Reddit. Although occasionally you get some very interesting things back from Reddit, which is actually why I'm filtering here for only JPEGs, because some strange files come back occasionally. But again, the important thing is that in order to update my UI, all I have to do is push this data into my model, my Reddit model, and it just appears on the screen. That's really all I have to do. So this is if you're familiar with front-end code, you're really not going to find this code very confusing. Do an HTTP call, loop over the results. This is just the format that Reddit's API happens to use. And for each of them, basically just push them out to the array. So I have this. Let's see, what's the next thing I want to do? Yeah, this kind of looks bad. Like, this is a really ugly iOS app. So I'm actually going to go back over here, and I'm pasting a little bit of CSS here, because I want to see what this looks like as well. And actually, I made one mistake. So I changed the page's background color to white. I also defined a CSS class name here, but I'm not using it yet. So the way you use CSS class names in NativeScript is you can apply them to elements. I need this CSS class attribute here. So I'll paste that in and build that out. And I think all I did was add a little spacing here. I added some height and a little bit of margin. So I should get a little bit more spacing. That looks a little bit nicer there. The next thing I want to do is, I'm getting somewhere here. I've got a nice little Reddit app. But I actually want to implement something that's kind of hard to do on web apps, and that's build an infinite scroll here. I want to get some more data. So the Reddit API has this query string of after that you can pass to it, and you can just pass it sequential things to keep getting more and more data. So I'm going to store off a variable here, place this here, and update this. And hopefully, I actually have one more thing to do. So this sets up my mechanism for every time I go in, I'm going to append basically where I was at, so subsequent calls keep getting new data. But of course, I'm not doing anything with that yet. What I need to do is go back to my list view, and the list view has a little event called load more items that I can call. Load more items there, and I can't spell. So I'll change that, and then I need to use the same exports keyword, load more items again. Let's see how good I can live type here. Load items, not paste, build, and hopefully, if I typed everything correctly, this should now be an infinite scroll list, because when I get to the bottom, the list view is going to invoke this load more items method, which will call my backend, and there we go. So I now have an infinite scroll list. Yeah, thank you. So I now have an infinite scroll list. You can see that I get some pretty nice performance here. I use the cuteness thread here, though, because the cuteness thread also gives me back images, which makes this demo even more adventurous. So we're going to see what Reddit returns for images here, which should be fairly entertaining here. So all I have to do is I have an item template here. Right now I just have this label, which is why we're just seeing text. But I also got back a URL. If you come back up here, you can see the title is the sort of text that's showing up here, but I can use. So I'm going to replace this label and put this in here and correct my indentation here. Now what you're seeing here is one of the layout elements that NativeScript provides for laying out your apps. I'm not going to get too in-depth into layouts today. There's, I believe, 5 or 6 different layouts that you can use. Stack layout is actually the simplest of them. It just says stack things up, either horizontally or vertically. In this case, the default is vertical. So I'm saying put a label and an image on top of each other. Now, because I get crazy things back from Reddit, I want to at least enforce a consistent height here. So I can do that, and hopefully we'll see some work-appropriate images here. So we'll go out to Reddit, and so we got some bunnies, some dogs. This thread is always good for demos. And I still get that nice infinite, oops, if I don't do that, I still get the nice infinite scroll behavior, and now I'm dealing with images as well. So this app's looking a little bit better. I've got a little Reddit viewer here, but it's still, I mean, this app is still kind of ugly to me. And I'm not going to be able to make this look great because I am definitely no designer. But I do have the ability to make some tweaks. So we talked earlier about how, and let me kill this so we have a little bit more room, NativeScript gives us this access to the native APIs. And so far, I haven't really used this. Everything I've been doing so far is just using the cross-platform stuff, things like the HTTP module and stuff. But because of this direct platform API access, I can just, anything I can do in iOS or Android that I want to tinker with, I can do. And so I like my iOS apps to have a nav bar, just personal preference there. So what I can do is I can get a reference to it in JavaScript, and I can just start calling things on it. So this is an iOS method, navigation bar hidden, which I think is the stupidest API because it's a double negative. So you have to say bar hidden equals false to show the thing. But it is what it is. You have a title, so this is going to show up here. And I can also change the color as well, and I have to use another verbose iOS API. But after I deploy this, what I should see is a little prettier look to my app here. I should get a little nav bar that shows up, and there we go. So we're getting a little bit better here. The next thing I want to do is I want to make like sort of the traditional master detail type look to this app. Because I actually want to, not do that, I actually want to make some changes to this image that shows up here. So I'm going to try to create 3 files here live. Probably would have been best to do this beforehand so that there wasn't this awkward period of me talking and typing. But we're going to act like this is normal. So we're going to create 3 meme files. Notice again the naming convention. I've named all of these memes so that NativeScript knows to tie these things together. Now, I want to transfer from the main page this file. Actually, I should zoom in. You guys can see this. I'm going to transfer from this main page file to the meme file. So the first thing I want to do is I got to add some navigation to this first. So I'm going to go in here, and another one of the attributes you can add to this list view is item tap. So I'm going to do that. Item tap equals item tap. And then I need some JavaScript to actually handle that. Let's clear some space on the screen here, and I'll put that in here as well. So this is using another NativeScript module, in this case the frame module, which NativeScript uses to actually provide navigation in your app. So I'm saying navigate, I'm telling it to navigate to the meme module. Remember, that was the name I used for the other set of files, and to have some context as well. In this case, my context, I'm just grabbing from my Reddit model, again, that same data model. The list view gives me a little index that I can use, so I can pull it out and say, here's my model, and go ahead and navigate there and pass it the object that you want to use to build this app up. So there's that. Of course, right now I'm taking them to this, the exciting nothing. So I need to put something in here. So I'm going to start by just putting in a basic image, just so I can show the back and forth from master to detail. And so I'll put this in. Again, you'll recognize the page module from before. This is the same image tag that I was using on the main page as well, just grabbing that exact same URL. So the only thing new here is this navigated to, and I'll show that. So actually, let me have my CSS first. I'm again going to use that same height that seems to work out pretty good, and a little foreshadowing in the stuff I have down there. You'll get to see what that is in a minute. And the last thing I have to add is some JavaScript here. Now, I said the new thing here was navigated to. Basically, it's just another one of these events that's on the page. In this case, this will be invoked when the page, well, as you might expect, gets navigated to. I can get that same context. That's where my data being transferred back and forth gets placed. And I have another data model. Remember the binding context property here. And in this data model, I'm just setting a simple property, URL. And to again show the mapping here, URL then maps to what I can use in this double curly brace syntax, so that I can pass that data, or use that data, in this case, subscribe to the URL from my XML. And we'll see if that worked for me. So what I should be able to do, let's find which one's entertaining here. I kind of like these dogs. So I can navigate then from one page to the other. And notice another thing that happened. On iOS, I automatically got the little back button control that I can use to go back and forth here. So I get this iOS native behavior kind of for free here. And you can see it's kind of wonky here. I'll show you how to clean that up here momentarily. The image doesn't get cleaned up quite right. There's some other events that we can use to do that sort of thing. So we got a little Reddit reader here. We got master detail. But what I want to do is to make this a little more fun is if you were at the NativeScript workshop yesterday, one of the things we built was a meme generator. So basically the ability to add some text to the top and bottom of the images. And the reason I started this demo with kind of a pre-scaffolded project is I'm cheating a little bit, and I have that code just chilling right up here, some image manipulation code, or code that is actually going to take some text and write it on images. Now this is pretty much the only part of this app I'm going to build that's really truly Android and iOS specific. So I can look in here and see a bunch of Android graphics APIs that I'm using to actually draw some text on the screen. And I have some iOS APIs as well. But what's cool, and as you'll see in a minute, is that for me, once somebody has already written this module, all I really have to do is require it and use it in my app. So I'm going to paste in a bunch of code, and I'll encourage you to try not to get overwhelmed here, because I am going to go through all of this. I'll kill this here. And I need, I believe, my XML here as well. So this gives me a little more, and I'm actually going to show this first so you can see what this is. Now this isn't using a whole lot that's new here. I have a scroll view, which is just a simple little tag I can use to make sure I don't get cut off at the bottom of the screen so that my app can scroll. Because on smaller phones, it's going to fit in this iPhone 6, but when I tested this out on a 5 on smaller devices, I needed to scroll. The same stack layout that we saw before that's used in this case to sequentially line up this image and these form controls underneath. I got 2 text fields and a couple other form fields down here. Now this one is new. We haven't seen this before. This is another of NativeScript's layout mechanism, the grid layout, which, as you might expect, just lets you lay out elements in a grid. You define rows and columns to be used to lay these elements out. But the important thing to note here is actually the data binding. So look at how these UI components, I'm saying, well, the image is coming from this image using the double curly from my data model, top text, bottom text, and whatever the other ones are named as well. So if I go into my JavaScript, and I'll create a little more room here, the code here is actually relatively straightforward. So I'll walk you through this method. This is the same navigated to we saw earlier, so the code that's going to run when I actually go to this page. And in this case, all it's saying is I need to go grab the image. Now I'm doing this because I'm going to be altering the image. I'm going to write some text on it. So I need to have a local copy of it. I need to grab it from the network. NativeScript uses the same just standards-based promises implementation, so I can change this or chain this with a then call as a callback for once I have the image pulled down. And if this app was a little smarter, NativeScript has an activity indicator that I could bring into the picture here to provide a little better experience, but I'm trying to keep things simple. But when it comes back, I'm basically just setting some default values. I'm saying, all right, well, the image, which was bound to here, is set to the result of my HTTP call. And I'm then defaulting these form fields. So you can see the top text is emptied out. My font size here defaults to somewhere here on the slider. And that's really all I need to do to initialize this app, to build out like really a cross-platform form and initialize it with some values. But the cool part comes when I actually want to use these values. And I have the image manipulation files that I showed you earlier hanging out down here. Now, this module just has a single API, add text. So you pass it the text you'd like to add, these other variables that you're configuring down here, and you get back an image. And personally, I love how clean this code is, because all I have to do, after the user has made changes to these things, I don't have to get references to UI components. All I do is grab things off the data model and then set them as part of the image. So to show this in action, this apply button is actually bound to this apply button here. So we can, native, let's see, I got to try to be witty here. NativeScript put me to sleep. And I'll apply that. Oh, and that's tiny. I got to bump that way up. Oh, man, this must be a huge image. So I can change it between black and white. I need a different image. That one's way too big. Let's try this one with the bunnies. I'm not witty enough. We'll just place something on here. So there we go. So now I have the ability to draw on this with text, and I'd be able to do so in a surprisingly small amount of code. But one of the cool things that using a data model also gives me is this code I have commented down here, and that I get some events essentially when things change in the data model. So when the user changes these elements, I have the ability to subscribe to those changes. So I'm going to make this a little bit cooler by saying instead, I'm just going to listen for when anything changes and call image manipulation then instead. And what I can do then is I can actually ditch this apply button altogether, because I have no need to apply the changes anymore. So I'll kill that and send that back out. And we'll give that a second to load up. And I like this bunny one again, so we'll go here. And now, if the demo gods are with me, check that out. As I make changes, I can see them live on my image. And yep, all right, awesome. So that works, yay! I am genuinely relieved that this has worked to this point. So we've got like 3 more steps. So hopefully the demo gods will remain with me here. So I built this cool Reddit meme generator that is probably not all that useful. However, this isn't all that practical if I can't share this with my friends. I've created these images. I really want to show these off. So what I want to do is I want to show how you could use a third-party module here and integrate this into your app. Because NativeScript at the moment, and this could change, but at the moment there's nothing that allows you to like socially share your stuff, tie into those native APIs. However, there is one up on NPM. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head into my app directory, and I'm going to install it. And I'll save it in my package JSON. And I want NativeScript social share. So I'll go ahead and grab that from NPM. Now what this did is it added a node modules directory within my app. I have the NativeScript social share, which is a really hard thing to say. It got installed in here. And again, if I look at the implementation here, it has a really simple API. This is really simple code because of the direct access I get to these native APIs. So what I'm going to do is, let's go back to my JavaScript here. Actually, let's get a little more space. Let's start in the XML. I want a place to actually invoke this code from. I need some UI element to actually kick off the sharing. And so I'm going to inject that in here. This is another NativeScript module menu item here that basically throws something up in the nav bar. I want a little nav bar item here that lets me share. And I'm defining this share, I'm tying to this share function. I need to actually go define it. So in my JavaScript, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bring in that module, the thing that I just got from npm, and bring that in there. Again, just a simple require call. And I'll come down here, and I want to actually use it. So there we go, social share. And if this all works, hopefully it will. We'll launch this up in Reddit, and I should be able to share images. So I'll go back to this bunny image here. I'll do my manipulation here. And after I'm done, I can click the share button. And you can check out that I now get the native iOS share widget. So pretty cool. Not all that cool because the simulator doesn't give me that many options. So I don't have a lot of fun sharing options. So actually, before I started here, deployed this out to my iPhone, which let's see if this mirroring is going to work. Excellent. So what I'm going to do is now on my actual device, I can share. I have a lot more sharing options here. I can go to a number of different services. So what I'm going to do is send a very awkward message to my boss. So, hi, Burke. Oops. Not going to give him any context here. We'll share that out. And yeah, so at Burke Holland here. Oops. Really, iOS? iOS tried to autocorrect on me. So we'll just say yo and go ahead and share that out. And we'll see what he responds to. But you can see how these are really nice building blocks to be able to use your app. So when I need this sort of cross-platform functionality for things like building my UI, making HTTP calls for really common things, it's something I'm able to do. But when I need to do very specific things to my apps, like in this case, drawing on an image, it's not a super common thing for apps to need to do, I can dive into the native code there where it makes sense. And what's also cool is I also deployed this app out to Android, and you can see that writing in this cross-platform way, I got an Android app that's functional as well. Now, this kind of looks kind of horrible. It doesn't actually. This link might not run. This should work though. Let me try this image to see if I have any better luck. So maybe you don't get a functional Android app out of this. It should work. I'll have to try it again later. But the idea is that I should be able to go back into my Android app and do just the little configuration that I did for iOS to kind of tweak it to get that Android polish and look and feel. So with that, I'll head back to my slides here. And where was I at? I only got a few more notes here. So that's basically all I have on NativeScript. If you want to learn more, a number of the NativeScript team members are around here. I'll be at the NativeScript, I forget what we're calling it, the expert panel over there for a good part of the day today. You'll have to come grab me. If you want to keep up to date on NativeScript, you can follow the NativeScript Twitter handle. It's probably the best place to keep up to date on that. NativeScript is completely open source. I mentioned this before, but really everything NativeScript does is open. So you can contribute to the docs. You can contribute to the C++ runtimes if you wanted to. You can contribute to those JavaScript modules, the NativeScript modules. Those are open as well. We have a full contributor guide out there. And that's all I really have. The final thing I have on my list is that if you like this talk, you should use the link bit.ly/next-vantoll2 to give me a high rating. If you did not like this talk, you should use bit.ly/next-holland. And with that, that's all I have. Oh, they took away my mic. I have no idea if I'm. Do we have time for questions, or am I over? 5 minutes. All right, questions.
So I'm very new to the mobile thing, so I hear PhoneGap, I played a little bit with Xamarin. How does this stand, when somebody's trying to make a decision, why is NativeScript, why going this direction is better, or is it just another addition?
Right, so the question was basically why NativeScript, because there are a lot of different alternatives out there, your PhoneGaps, your Xamarins. I would say the primary reason is when you want to build a completely native UI, which Xamarin also gives you as well, but also that you want to build in JavaScript. NativeScript embraces JavaScript front and foremost. So for instance, I showed my code here in JavaScript, but we have a lot of fans at Telerik of TypeScript. And you could use TypeScript with NativeScript as well, and that compiles down. You could use any ES6 generator if you like Babel or Tracer or any of those tools. You could use those with NativeScript as well. You could use CoffeeScript. You could use Dart if you really wanted to. Anything that compiles into JavaScript you can use. So I'd say the two compelling reasons to use it would be you want a native UI, you really want to have a truly native app, and you want to write in JavaScript as well. Yeah?
If I want to build pretty secure, Windows app or the Android app,
Yep.
so do you have any kind of like encryption mechanism, like pre-built?
Yep, the question was basically around encryption. And so as you might have heard earlier, like the JavaScript is packaged directly in your app. So the JavaScript does reside in your app, the JavaScript does run in runtime. So the JavaScript has to be in your app. But we're looking into ways that we can encrypt that JavaScript and sort of decrypt it at runtime. So that's something that's on our roadmap and something that we're looking into. Yeah. So the question was around iOS and Android version support. NativeScript supports iOS 7 plus, so 7 and 8, and Android 4.2 plus. Yeah, I should have had that in my talk, so good question. Yeah?
So I noticed you use a native iOS navbar, right?
Yep.
Is there a cross-platform module for navbars?
Yes, I'm trying to remember the specifics. It's something that just came in 1.0 because I know I had to polish up my demos for doing it. Yes, there's ways of doing it. I just don't remember the exact syntax. Any other questions? Yeah, we got one up front. I think I can walk over.
Can you leverage core data with NativeScript?
Core data, I'm not sure. You have to, we can come chat later and I can find out. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to grab me around. Thanks.